The tension reached a boiling point during a fiery segment on national television. Karoline Leavitt appeared on a popular Sunday morning political show, where she was interviewed by a panel of journalists and political analysts. The topic of the day? Trump's new tariffs on Chinese imports and the mounting criticism from high-profile Democrats, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Clips from Pelosi's recent press conference played at the beginning of the segment. In the footage, Pelosi stood before a crowd of reporters, describing the 145% tariff as economically irresponsible and globally dangerous, warning that Trump's trade war could boomerang on American farmers, small businesses, and consumers. Her tone was firm, her expression unwavering, and her words calculated to stir opposition. But Karoline Leavitt was ready as soon as the cameras turned back to her. She leaned forward with a calm but steely presence. "It's interesting," she began, her voice cool and measured, "to hear Speaker Pelosi lecture the American people about economic responsibility, when in 2018, she herself advocated for stronger measures against China. Let's not forget that she once accused China of brazenly unfair trade policies and demanded the United States respond in kind." She paused as the panel tried to cut in, but Leavitt pressed forward. She may not want to admit it now, but Nancy Pelosi agreed with President Trump before it became politically inconvenient for her. These tariffs are not a knee-jerk reaction. They're part of a long-overdue strategy to hold China accountable for decades of intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and manufacturing exploitation. President Trump isn't afraid to stand up for American workers, even if it means taking heat from career politicians like Pelosi. As Leavitt spoke, social media lit up. Clips from her appearance were quickly clipped and shared, with hashtags like #TariffTruths, #PelosiFlipFlop, and #CarolineClapsBack trending on X, formerly Twitter. Conservative commentators praised her unapologetic tone and her willingness to confront Democratic leadership head-on, while liberal voices criticized her as misleading and overly aggressive. But it wasn't just about style. Leavitt brought facts to the table that caught the attention of even moderate viewers. She cited a study from the Peterson Institute that revealed how targeted tariffs on key industries such as steel, semiconductors, and solar panels had actually led to the revitalization of several struggling manufacturing sectors in the Midwest during Trump's first term. "Tariffs are a tool," she emphasized. "We don't use them recklessly, but we won't hesitate to use them when our sovereignty and economic security are on the line. This administration is choosing America first, just like the voters asked us to." The clip of Leavitt's comments circulated so widely that Nancy Pelosi herself felt compelled to respond. Later that day, Pelosi issued a statement calling Leavitt's remarks an act of historical revisionism and accusing the Trump administration of using protectionism as a political weapon rather than a strategic tool. But Leavitt didn't back down. Within hours, she posted a tweet quoting Pelosi's 2018 comments directly, accompanied by side-by-side video clips that starkly contrasted her previous stance with her current opposition to the tariffs. Her caption read, "You can't have it both ways, Madam Speaker. The American people are watching." Leavitt's response ignited a storm of commentary, but more importantly, it solidified her status as a rising conservative firebrand. She wasn't just defending Trump's policies. She was making herself the face of a new generation of Republican leadership, younger, sharper, and fiercely unafraid to challenge the old guard, even if that meant clashing with one of the most experienced political figures in modern history. As she exited the studio, reporters swarmed her with follow-up questions. One asked whether the tariffs would risk global trade stability. Her answer? It's not about global comfort zones. It's about American resilience. Following her viral television appearance and the surge of national attention, Karoline Leavitt wasn't content to stay confined within the press briefing room or cable news studios. True to the Trump administration's renewed grassroots strategy, she hit the road, speaking directly to the American people, especially in the Midwest and Rust Belt regions that had been ground zero in the fight over U.S.-China trade policy. Her first major stop, Toledo, Ohio, a manufacturing town that had weathered years of outsourcing and economic decline, only to experience modest recovery during Trump's first term. The crowd that greeted her was electric. Blue-collar workers, small business owners, and lifelong conservatives packed into a local factory repurposed for the rally, holding signs that read, "Fair Trade Now," and "Trump Means Business." As she stepped onto the stage, dressed in a sharp red blazer and holding a binder of economic data in one hand, she didn't waste time with small talk. "You all know what it's like to be ignored," she said, her voice amplified across the warehouse. For decades, career politicians in Washington turned a blind eye as China swallowed up our jobs, our factories, and our futures. They shook hands with Beijing while you paid the price. The crowd erupted. But President Trump didn't forget you. He didn't forget your families. He didn't forget Toledo. And that's why he imposed these tariffs, to bring power back to the American worker. Leavitt paused to invite local residents on stage. One by one, they spoke about what the Trump-era tariffs had meant for them. A steelworker named Dave explained how his plant, once threatened with closure, had reopened in 2019 after a wave of federal pressure on foreign competitors. A mother of 3 said her husband finally found consistent work again after a decade of instability. These tariffs aren't theoretical, Leavitt told the crowd. They're transformative. But she didn't stop there. With a slide presentation, she compared the U.S. trade deficit with China from 2001 to 2016 against the sharp reduction that occurred during Trump's first term. She showed data indicating how domestic investment in manufacturing had begun to climb again in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. "Do you want to go back to the days of surrender?" she asked. "Because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are betting that you do." The response was a thunderous, unified "no." Then came the moment the crowd had been waiting for, Leavitt's signature takedown of Pelosi's political gymnastics. She played 2 clips on the overhead screen. The first showed Pelosi in 2010 praising China's rise as a sign of global cooperation. The second featured her 2018 call for strong and smart action against Chinese trade abuses. And finally, her latest condemnation of Trump's 145% tariffs. "Which is it?" Leavitt asked. "Are we supposed to roll over and let China cheat us blind, or stand tall and fight back?" Leavitt turned and looked directly into the cameras broadcasting the event. "Nancy Pelosi can't make up her mind. But you, the American people, you've already made yours. You want leadership that doesn't back down. You want policies that work. And you want to stop pretending that China is our friend." She ended the rally with a call to action. Don't let the swamp gaslight you. Don't let media elites tell you this is wrong. You've lived through the consequences of failed trade deals. Now you're living through the fight to fix them. Naturally, the media didn't hold back. Mainstream networks accused Leavitt of oversimplifying complex trade issues and dismissed her presentation as campaign theatrics. But conservative outlets, from Newsmax to the Daily Wire, hailed it as a masterclass in political communication. Even more notable was the reaction from the business community. While Wall Street remained cautious about the long-term effects of the tariffs, several domestic manufacturers expressed cautious optimism. One CEO anonymously told the Wall Street Journal, "Leavitt's speech hit the right nerve. It's rare to see a White House press secretary engage this deeply with the economic base." Back in Washington, Democrats scrambled to push back. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries dismissed Leavitt's economic fairy tales, while others warned that China could retaliate in ways that hurt U.S. technology companies and exporters. Still, polls showed a noticeable shift. Approval of Trump's trade policy had climbed by 8% among working-class voters in battleground states. Leavitt, with her sharp tongue and unapologetic style, had helped move the needle, not just for the administration, but for the broader conservative cause. And she was just getting started. By the time Karoline Leavitt returned to Washington, she had not only fired up Trump's base across the Midwest, but she had also ignited a political firestorm on Capitol Hill. Leavitt wasn't merely responding to Pelosi anymore. She was driving the conversation, and that led to her most high-profile appearance yet, a fiery testimony before the House Economic Affairs Committee. Although unusual for a sitting White House press secretary to be invited to testify, the hearing had been demanded by Democrats furious at the administration's abrupt increase in tariffs. They expected to grill her and force the White House to backtrack. What they didn't expect was Leavitt walking into the hearing room prepared, unflinching, and, most importantly, armed with Pelosi's own words. The chamber was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Conservative and liberal commentators alike had eyes glued to the live feed. Leavitt, seated beneath the Golden Dome lights, began her opening statement calmly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the committee," she said, "we are not here today to debate ideology. We're here to face economic reality. And that reality is simple. China has profited off of American weakness for decades, and President Trump's tariffs are an answer to that weakness." Then, as Democratic lawmakers shifted in their seats, she dropped her first bombshell. In 2018, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, and I quote, "The United States must take strong, smart, and strategic action against China's brazenly unfair trade policies." That's not my opinion. That's not a paraphrase. That's her exact words. The room fell silent. She now calls those same tariffs reckless. So I ask, what changed? The trade practices? Or her political calculation? Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seated directly across from Leavitt, was the first to challenge her. "Ms. Leavitt," AOC began, "what you call strength, many families call inflation. Tariffs hurt working-class Americans by raising prices on basic goods." Leavitt didn't flinch. "And what do you suggest we do, Congresswoman? Let China continue to dump steel at below-market prices? Let them steal our intellectual property with zero consequence? Tariffs are a defense mechanism, not a punishment. You don't lose a war by standing up. You lose it by surrendering before the fight." Next came Congressman Eric Swalwell, who accused the Trump administration of economic brinkmanship. To that, Leavitt shot back, "It's only brinkmanship if you're afraid to win. The American people didn't elect President Trump to negotiate with weakness. They elected him to defend their jobs, their homes, and their future." Republican representatives on the committee quickly turned the tide. Congressman Jim Jordan, clearly impressed, praised Leavitt for exposing what he called Pelosi's flip-flop Olympics. "What Karoline has done here today," Jordan said, "is something we've all been trying to do for years: hold our Democrat colleagues accountable for their selective outrage." Others echoed the sentiment. Senator Josh Hawley posted on X, "Karoline Leavitt just handed Democrats their lunch on live TV. Pelosi can't talk her way out of her own record." Pelosi's team responds. Meanwhile, Pelosi's office scrambled to clarify. Her spokesperson issued a statement that attempted to split hairs. Speaker Pelosi supports strategic trade enforcement, not blanket tariffs that harm everyday Americans. Ms. Leavitt is misrepresenting her position. But by then, the damage was done. Clips from the hearing were already being edited into highlight reels. One conservative PAC released a 60-second ad titled, "Then versus Now, Pelosi's China Flip-Flop," featuring Leavitt's testimony and Pelosi's past statements in a back-to-back comparison. The press, of course, went into overdrive. CNN called the hearing a high-stakes gamble by the GOP that paid off in ratings. MSNBC accused Leavitt of weaponizing selective quotes. Fox News, however, hailed her as the most effective press secretary since Reagan's era. Online, she trended for over 24 hours under the hashtag Leavitt versus Pelosi, with many dubbing the moment as Leavitt's political coming of age. But to Leavitt, it wasn't about scoring political points. In a short clip released after the hearing, she simply said, "I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to remind Washington what the truth sounds like." The aftermath of Karoline Leavitt's fiery testimony before the House Economic Affairs Committee was nothing short of seismic. News outlets continued to dissect her every word, and the political landscape seemed to shift beneath her feet. What had started as a defense of Trump's tariffs had transformed into a full-blown reckoning for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Leavitt had succeeded not just in defending the administration's policies, but in exposing a political hypocrisy that many in Washington had hoped would stay buried. Leavitt's victory wasn't just symbolic. It had tangible political consequences. The administration's polling numbers ticked up, particularly among independent voters and suburban conservatives, who had previously wavered on Trump's trade policies. Leavitt's effectiveness at navigating the trade debate and confronting Pelosi head-on solidified her position as one of the most influential voices in the White House. But she wasn't resting on her laurels. As the press secretary, her role was far from over. In fact, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. In the days following the hearing, Leavitt met with the president in the Oval Office. They discussed not only the tariffs but also how best to counteract the growing rhetoric from Democrats who were framing the trade war as an economic disaster for American families. "It's not enough to just respond to them, Karoline," President Trump said. "We need to show the American people how much better their lives will be once we've leveled the playing field with China." Leavitt's mind raced as she formulated the next phase of the messaging campaign. It wasn't enough to simply claim the tariffs were working. Her team needed to show the tangible benefits of the policy. It was time to take the fight directly to the communities most affected by these policies. The farmers, the manufacturers, the small business owners who had initially felt the sting of the trade wars but were now beginning to see the light. Just weeks later, Leavitt took the stage in Pennsylvania, delivering a speech that marked a new phase in her political career. Addressing a crowd of factory workers and small business owners in Pittsburgh, she laid out the administration's broader vision for a resurgent America. "Let's be clear," she began, her voice firm and assured. "We are not in a trade war, we are in an economic revolution. The tariffs were the spark that lit this fire. They pushed us to invest in ourselves again. They gave our industries the space to grow, and they sent a clear message to the world. America is no longer a nation that apologizes for putting its workers first." The crowd roared in approval. "But we can't stop here," Leavitt continued. "This is only the beginning. We're bringing back jobs. We're rebuilding manufacturing. And we're not going to let anyone, including Nancy Pelosi, tell us that this fight is over." As she spoke, a wave of support flooded social media. Clips from her speech were shared across conservative platforms, and hashtags like #ResurgentAmerica and #TariffVictory trended nationally. The speech was a masterstroke, combining bold political rhetoric with a clear, optimistic vision for America's future. A future where Trump's tariffs were not seen as an economic burden, but as a stepping stone toward American renewal. However, Leavitt knew that the battle wasn't won yet. Pelosi's team continued to push back, framing the tariffs as a political stunt rather than a sound economic policy. In the weeks that followed, Democrats ramped up their criticisms, warning of potential economic collapse if the trade war escalated further. They even began a campaign to repeal the tariffs through legislative action. But for Leavitt, this was just another challenge to overcome. She used every available platform, from White House briefings to social media, to make sure the public understood that the tariffs were working, that they were benefiting Americans in ways they hadn't realized yet. Leavitt's approach was meticulous. She started calling attention to the tangible benefits of these policies: new factory openings, a resurgence in domestic production, a decline in unemployment rates in key swing states. "We're seeing it right here in real time," Leavitt said during a White House press briefing. "These aren't abstract economic theories. We're talking about real families, real jobs, real progress. And let me be clear, we're not going to let anyone derail that progress. Not Nancy Pelosi, not anyone." As the year drew to a close, Karoline Leavitt had cemented herself not only as a force within the White House but also as a rising star in the Republican Party. Her ability to take on entrenched political figures like Pelosi, her sharp communication skills, and her unwavering commitment to Trump's economic policies had turned her into a political powerhouse in her own right. Looking toward the future, there were rumors that she might run for office herself, perhaps even for governor of New Hampshire or a seat in the U.S. Senate. The political world was watching closely to see where Leavitt would go next. Regardless of her next steps, one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt had become a formidable voice in American politics, and she had irrevocably changed the narrative around President Trump's trade policies. The battle for America's future, she knew, was far from over, and she was ready to lead the charge.